Welcome to the Critical Media Studies Podcast. We're your hosts, Mike Rapici
and Barry Falk.
Dr. Rapici, how are you this evening?
Dr. Falk, I'm doing well, sir. It's good to see you again. Good to talk to you. How are you?
Good to see you again. We feel that we've had a little bit of a hiatus, but we're happy to be back and happy to be talking about critical media studies. In particular, we're talking about a piece by Alberto Romero. I'm trying to remember. I should have checked. I'm trying to remember the context. We read Mr. Romero's from his Substack before. I want to say that it was about photography, something about maybe AI photography. But we've had an episode drawing on Alberto Romero's Substack, The Algorithmic Bridge. And we've done it before, and we're doing it again tonight because we're going to talk about an issue, the issue of AI deepfakery. In particular, the title of this, I believe it's the November, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, November 11th, 2025, fairly recently.
That's correct.
Posting. And the name of the article is AI Videos Should Be Illegal. The title's a little misleading.
Yeah.
Because, it's a little misleading. It's a little bit clickbaitish. But anyway, we clicked and we were baited, and we baited and we were clicked and we read, and we think it's worth discussing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an interesting discussion. I think really, as I see it, if I was going to give my sort of, 10,000 foot gloss of this, I would say that this is really kind of an investigation into the effects of this, and maybe simultaneously
the effects of AI
deepfake, but also kind of a criticism in a way about the sort of state of knowledge and consumption, where and how we sort of place the locus of truth and value and authenticity. I think.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And just to build on what you just said very briefly, I think implicit, I'll use the same word you use, critique.
Yeah.
I think implicit in all this, in the discussion of the new technologies, AI technologies that allow for what are called, what's called deep fakes. On Romero's part, there's an implied criticism of our current social situation, aided and abetted by social media, not just AI, where we seem to be living in a kind of final death knell crisis of expertise, where experts, professionals of all sorts, credentialed people of all sorts are, instead of being trusted and revered, they're certainly not trusted and revered implicitly anymore. Their authority is challenged. But I would even go further in saying there seems to be an almost reflexive, deep-seated distrust, mistrust, and rejection of claims made by experts to know things. And that, I think, is really that's the other nub that Mr. Romero is, I think. I think when we get into the essay, we're going to see that issue about what to do without culture, what to do with culture when you no longer have curators or experts in a culture. That issue is going to come up.
Right? Barry, I think this is actually a fairly elegant, for us certainly, on-ramp into the discussion, because
well, for us, it's that, a damn delegate.
How's that for a left-handed compliment, sir? No, I think that's right, because this is, I don't know that I would say that this is the death knell, but this is certainly a discussion that prompts a stepping back, and it's not hard to see the evolution or the devolution,
right,
of knowledge and expertise and truth in this. And I think that it's a conversation that I think you could argue we probably should have had 5 years ago. It's a conversation
Right.
whose origin, I think, I mean, what did I was thinking this goes back probably
2005, we were talking about it
2005,
earlier, right?
right? So
2005 with the
Colbert
Stephen
coined the term
Colbert. Right,
truthiness, right? And
right,
so
right.
I think that we see the erosion of what you and I might have historically referred to as fact
Right.
in the face of not just alternative facts, but now sort of an alternate series of realities that are indistinguishable in many ways.
Well,
Um,
I want us to get on the on ramp, and I know we
let's,
have a
I,
problem getting on the on ramp, but
yep, 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 yep.
I think what you just said is really kind of crucial. Um, there has been a kind of devolution since the truthiness joke, and it's important. Like at the
Yeah,
very beginning, it's a joke, it's satire, and um, and we can all have a knowing, wink and a laugh at the situation. It doesn't seem dire, but I think and maybe it hasn't been that rapid, 2005, 20 years later, but um, I think you well described, this is why I sort of stopped the conversation. You very well described our current reality that we've shifted from, say, debates between facts and alternate set of facts between groups who would spout facts or proclaim facts. And then there would be another group that would say, we have facts too, but our facts look different and our facts are better. But we've now moved to a situation where I think all of us seem to be inhabiting constantly shifting alternate states of reality. I'm trying to, I think that was the word you use. I love the phrase you use.
yeah. I think that, and maybe this should be our sort of merge off the on ramp and onto the freeway here.
Uh-huh.
But I think that the interesting distinction is that in 2005, as you said, with Colbert using the term truthiness, it was a joke. It was satire. It was clearly it was clearly distinguishable from
Sure,
non-jokey things, right?
sure.
It
Right.
stood very clearly for what it was. And I think part of the thing that Romero's, gesturing towards here, sometimes very obviously and emphatically, is that this distinction between a joke or satire and things that are serious is now completely blurred
Right.
to the
Right.
point where it's
Right.
indistinguishable. And so the problem that we have is these alternate facts, as you just called them, are incompatible with the facts that preceded them, and
And the
with
facts
which
that
they
will follow them,
right
and the facts that will follow them.
and the complication is that all of these so-called facts need to be in conversation with each other in order for dialogue to be productive.
That's
And
wonderfully
so
wonderfully
you
put.
and that's what gets us at this standstill that sort of, you know, I don't want to say it culminates, but it leads us to this Substack. And so I
Uh,
think the
yes.
the best way of tackling this little beast here is to I would like to just sort of there's a few points in here that he makes which I think are worthy of some in-depth discussion. But I think that in order to to follow his train of thought, what I would like to do is just quickly run through the article top to bottom and stop where our fancy takes us. But I think it's important that we provide context for those of you listening. And so, Barry, with your uh, permission here, I'm going to jump right in. Um, and so let's do
Please
this.
do.
So he starts out with I pushed the wrong button on my computer. There we go. So he starts the video. Excuse me. The Substack starts out with a video of Neil deGrasse Tyson, which we will uh, we'll link to this in the notes or the description of the video, so
Mhm.
you guys can or the of the podcast, so you guys can see it if you want. But it's Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about deepfakes, and he himself was apparently deep faked, I guess we say. And the thing about it that I found particularly interesting is that he came to it because this is I love this. If Neil deGrasse Tyson and Terry Crews are in fact dear good friends, somehow that makes the world a better place in my mind. But that Terry Crews, who is apparently a friend of Neil deGrasse Tyson, sees this and says, "Wow, this is really impressive." And he calls him to tell him how great it is. And Tyson is like, "That's not me. I didn't do that." And so I think that the first sort of alarming bit here is that we see in real time that it's convincing. These deep fakes are not the bad six-fingered handshakes that you used to have in
Mhm.
early AI generation. Um, and he leans into this. Tyson, in talking about this, really leans into in the video, sort of leans into one of his explanations about how you know it's not him is that what you see, the version of him doing is shilling for things, or is doing things that are somehow out of character for him or against character. And so the sort of delineation between truth and authenticity and deep fakery lies in the content aligning with Tyson's established ethos, right? Like, this is who I am. And if you see things that aren't consistent with who I am, you should know that it's a fake. And I think that's an interesting but kind of problematic line to draw, because uh, where and how are we supposed to be able to discern the difference between what's real and what's false if we don't have that firsthand knowledge of things? And this idea of
Right.
knowledge becomes central to Romero's argument. So, anyways, that's how we start. And he goes through and he talks about, well, that's um, uh, he posts a picture of a deep fake generated by Google of Donald Trump winning a third term, and that's Wolf Blitzer there, I believe, right? And it's
Yes, indeed.
so you got the newscast from CNN with Trump winning his third term, and everything looks incredibly authentic. I mean, if this
Hmm.
wasn't from a future date, November 6th, 2027, um, this could very easily be misconstrued as real and honest. So this is where I'll jump in with Romero, unless you wanted to add something to this.
No, let's proceed.
So he says, and I'm reading from Romero here. A Trump third term video deepfake doesn't sound so crazy, right? I can no longer tell that this image is a fake, just to be clear. I know only because Google has somehow implemented an invisible and hopefully indelible watermark. Good for them. But the tech is well past the point of obvious telltale cues. Where did we leave the crooked fingers and six fingered hands? And then he's got some images of all the old
Hmm.
handshakes, the early AI stuff. Fair, Alberto, but who's going to believe a fake Trump 2028? He says in
Yeah, so this is
quotations.
the counter argument. Let me just stop
Yes,
to
yes.
very briefly insert, to give the listener a sense of the rhythm of the argument. So the presentation of the Neil deGrasse Tyson video, and also the discussion, and also the fake Trump wins third term video. Um, Romero imagines a reader who says, "Ah, we're not really there yet. What's the harm of
I
deepfakes?"
think
And then here's the answer. And
that's the bigger
here's,
question, right? Is the
yeah,
so
like,
what?
yeah, is it really so bad? Okay, yeah, AI is getting better. And is anybody really going to believe these more audacious examples of deep fakes?
And
And
you know what? I want to
yeah,
return to that in a few
sure,
minutes. This question. So
sure.
let's sort of put a little pin on this one here. This idea about how and why people would believe this. And so we
Yes,
can come
yes,
back to that. So he says,
yes.
fair, Alberto, but who's going to believe a fake Trump 2028? I'm glad you asked, because I only use this easily debunkable example to grab your attention for those cases you can't possibly fact check.
And here are some
Ima-
more examples,
he
right?
says, imagine a deep fake of something more insidious, harder to corroborate, like the report of a terrorist attack in New York City, or something that spreads faster, like a testimony from the CIA director that aliens exist, or something that could turn your intimate life upside down, like fake revenge porn of yourself, or something mundane, barely noticeable, like a spam video call. Except suddenly, it turns into the worst nightmare possible. Wait, and this is in quotations. Wait, that's my daughter, sweetie. Why are you handcuffed? Dad, please, they've kidnapped me, please. So he says, this is terrifying. AI video as well as other AI generated audiovisual media, is a direct attack on the society built on trust over knowledge. And so this is where we want to
That's a
stop.
crucial, yeah, that's crucial, right? That last bit. Why is this terrifying to Romero? Why is this, yeah, terrifying to use his word? Why is it so? Because this technology is, whatever its intention, whatever its other uses, Romero is making the provocative claim that it constitutes, quote, a direct attack on a society. And he's going to explain this last bit of the sentence, a direct attack on a society built on trust over knowledge. So implicitly, and he's going to talk about this, social structures are implicitly built on trust over facts, over truth, over knowledge. That there is a kind of fundamental, I'm just talking through in advance of what you're going to read, Michael, but it seems like it's an interesting provocative claim that because one would think that one could very easily make that there are the societies are built on certain truth claims, or societies are built on certain forms of knowledge or truths. But I really think this is correct that maybe first and foremost in a social structure, there has to be trust in the other person's openness, willingness, or ability to convey, communicate a truth. That the
Well,
trust comes first.
it does. And I think this is where it's really to really magnify the degree to which this is terrifying, because I think we have different tiers of terror, if you will, here. Okay.
That is
But
definitely my next book, Tears
tiers
of
of terror.
Terror.
And there's a good play on words there too. I
Yeah,
like that.
yes. Tears,
Um,
tears of
yes, no,
terror.
okay. I was in the IERS of terror here, right? But if you go back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Like this notion of truthiness and alternative facts, right? This what Romero is arguing here is like the notion of trust was in many ways institutional trust, right? So if you think about what's happened with, and we were talking earlier about the sort of the decline in the value of expertise, right?
Right,
Because
right,
we can all do our own research and we're all suddenly able to be experts in things.
right.
But the erosion that was happening before AI of trust in our
Of trust.
institutions,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So you think about like, well, what is the value of expertise? What's the value of a degree? What is the value of an institution? It is now amplified, magnified exponentially by virtue of the fact that it is not at all difficult to manufacture incredibly convincing alternatives in a world where that trust that we used to place in these institutions or people, or pick your signifier here, are
Mhm,
already under attack, and now everything is suspect. It's not so much a case that I can be misled by things. I think that's part of the
mhm,
equation, but this is a double-edged sword. On one hand, if I do trust, I make myself a potential victim by being misled by something that's false. So the institution or the people in whom I want to place trust, or in which I want to place trust,
mhm.
are now fallible. But
Right,
additionally, I
right.
have to, and what's the only way of combating that? To again double down on a distrust with skepticism, right? So I think that the problem here, that it's not just, I guess what I'm trying to identify, what I'm trying to make clear here, and I don't know if I'm doing a good job, it's not just the potential of the deep fake that is terrifying, but it is the implication of the reality that there is such a thing as a deep fake, which serves to further erode the lack of trust that the deep fake in and of itself creates. So,
Create.
we have talked about um, the it's the pharmacon is the word I'm looking for. Okay, it this this it's and it's interesting because it's not a specific thing that's a pharmacon. It is now our relationship to the truth itself has become pharmacological, right? We need this trust in order to move forward. But at the same time, we can't place trust in the thing, and therefore moving forward becomes this sort
Right.
of difficult, unknowable, untenable task.
Well, I love what you were saying, and I think you made it very clear. And I'm glad you used the word pharmacon because I think we're
I'm glad I
contractually,
found the word
I'm
pharmacon.
glad, all these things, because we're contractually obligated on critical media studies podcasts, as everyone knows, to use the word pharmacon at least once, certainly per every two episodes, but I think more we mostly do it every episode. But I think the other way, when you were talking, I was actually thinking, and I really appreciate the insight, Michael. I thought what you were really describing, though, is a kind of feedback loop,
Yes,
that there is a kind of critical mass that is created by there that AI is feeding and creating, where that feeds on distrust and creates more distrust and mistrust, right?
yes. Okay. So that's the tiers of terror, right? I think that we can. Shall we move through the rest of his argument a little bit, or
Yes,
do you want
yes.
to?
But thanks for that insight.
Oh, absolutely. So he goes. And I think this is picking up large. He talks a bit about what we know and what we don't know.
Hmm.
But a little further down, he says to address this fundamental feature of a complex world, you can only know the bare minimum by yourself. We build trust in curated sources and shared fictions. And then we go on with our lives as if this is an acceptable state of affairs. Who is Pedro Sanchez? I don't know. He's talking about the King of Spain here,
King
correct?
of Spain, I believe.
Um, I don't know. We convince ourselves that our sources are trustworthy and that they will remain so under any event, say, like a deepfake epidemic. And most will, to be sure. But there are also those sources we take for granted as trustworthy without realizing they're vulnerable to forgery, impersonation, or counterfeiting, such as the President of the United States or a famous astrophysicist. So,
So,
go ahead.
did you want to move to the next bit, or am I allowed to insert a question here? I can hold off on my question if you wanted to go
I
there.
would go so far as to say you are encouraged to insert a question
Well,
here, Barry.
I'd like to insert a question because this is a question for you, Michael.
Yeah.
You're in this Zoom meeting with me, so it's a question for you. Do you feel okay? I wanted to root my question in his words. So yeah, no, that's fine. What you're projecting will work. Um, is it the case, do you think, that we need a requisite amount of trustworthy sources in order to have social order?
Well,
Is there something like a bare minimum? Like, for example, let me give you an example to flesh that out
that's
in
a
case that's too abstract.
fascinating
Well,
question.
well. Let me give you a little bit of meat on that bone because that sounds all over the place. But actually, I'm thinking really only of a world that existed in my lifetime and in your lifetime. I'll just let's go back to 15, 20 years, but maybe even as recent as 10 years when, Barry living in my little world, and I dare say there were a lot of middle class folk like me who were living in this particular world where I basically relied on mainstream media. I was very much aware, just because I'm an academic, of alternatives to mainstream media.
Hmm.
But I admit that my go to for news sources for finding out who's the president of Spain or things like this were I can name the number of newspapers and sources I was reading, right? I would
Hmm.
read certain magazines, certain journals, and read especially certain newspapers. I'm boring. I read the New York Times. I thought that was kind of the paper of record. And so we're now, of course, have long been in a situation where Washington Post, New York Times, especially what mainstream media has been on on the defensive for now many years. How long? Maybe a decade at least. But
Mm-hmm.
it's sort to me it poses the question: how? So what constitutes normal? If that world that you and I used to live in, where we could take source, I mean, that was the world that allowed me to take truth sources for granted.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we don't have that
No.
anymore.
So here's the thing. I think that's in this is a really fascinating question. I'm so glad you asked this. I think that part of the problem that we have is that, as you said, this was the discussion, the world that you just described was the world of your childhood. It was the world of your, I would say this was the world of your adult years until probably the last
Oh
10,
yeah,
15 years.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
this is, I guess my point is certainly, um, this was my, this was how I grew up, right? Now you and I are not spring chickens, but at the same time, we're not dead yet. So it's not unrecognizable. The problem
Not
is,
yet. Right.
yeah, well, it depends when you're listening. Um, the problem is that in the last 20 years, there has been such a radical shift
Right, right,
away
right,
from this. But I think we're still living in, or we are living in this world that is relying upon some sort of media centric nostalgia that we
hmm.
are sort of overlaying with what we have now. And I'll give you an example of this, right? So you talk about mainstream media. Well, that's interesting. There used to be what, three, four networks. If you
Right,
wanted your
right.
news, it was down to three or four networks. And the only difference among them was whose voice you liked best,
That was it.
because the content was indistinguishable, because we weren't working with alternative facts,
Right,
right? Journalism was very different than what we call journalism now.
right.
And the role of media was very different. Now, you think about, like, I was boring. Well, I think everybody that consumes media has what they consider to be boring, standard, truthful sources, right? So we've siloed ourselves, and one person's MSNBC is the next person's Fox News is the next person's who knows
Right.
what, but they're all credible and truthful and factual to that perception. The problem is that we've all splintered. So to go back to your question about whether we need, how did you put it? Do we need to agree on things? Well,
Is there a standard number? I was wondering if this is a provocation. I was just wondering. Well, okay, we need certain. Can we quantify it? If we have two or three sources, is that enough to create a society of trust?
okay, so the society of trust. Well, so here's the interesting thing, Barry. Do we in fact live in a society of trust?
Still, is what you're
Right.
suggesting. I think
I'm
that's where
not
you're headed,
I'm
right?
not
That's where you're
convinced
headed.
I'm not convinced that we do. I think we
Oh.
live in a society of very tenuous agreement based on certain social structures, which in and of themselves are
Ooh,
rapidly changing, right?
ooh,
So,
ooh.
if you look at the, so
My
look at,
call. I'm feeling a little trembly right
that
now. I thought
sounded
that
fancy. But
no, that was wonderful.
if you
That's
think about it,
wonderful.
well, so if you think about it, like, think about the way that government works, right? We still have three branches of government, right? And in theory, there's a set of rules about how each of those three branches is supposed to conduct themselves.
Right.
And so we have something that is recognizable. And we don't have to change yet the way that the history books explain the Constitution or explain how government is supposed to work. But you don't need special eyes to realize that the, sort of standard operating procedure of yesteryear, and I'm not talking about six generations ago, I'm talking about 15, 20 years ago, is absolutely not what's happening now. So I think that what's holding us together societally, if you will, right, is a system in flux. And if you think about it, it's like we've all just agreed to sort of hang out and see whether or not we get a third term, whether or not that's real, right? Um, we get a chance to see how, you know, who I guess whose media is going to scream loudest. Yes, I don't know.
Well, as it happens, about Alberto Romero posits or throws out the possibility that legal there might be a legal path toward a solution. There might be a legal solution to this impasse, to the crisis of truth.
Yeah, yeah, let's here. Let me we'll read what he says and then you and I can jump into this and we'll see where he goes. So
Okay.
this is he goes down a little further and he says, while governments and institutions did little to prevent this, industry leaders like OpenAI and Google raced to get there first and inundate the world with deepfake slop. He says, watermark or not, people will fall for it. People laughed at the six-fingered hands mocking the obvious mistakes, but most are yet to learn the first law of deep learning. You don't bet against it. They will cry once these mistakes are nowhere to be found. In other words, our critical time window has closed. And like a newborn cat forced by circumstance or an experimenter's hand, we are blind. We will have to learn to live by inverting the dynamics of acquiring knowledge and building trust. We used to trust first and check later, and now we must check first and trust later, if ever. Or conversely, we could make AI video illegal. So his
And
argument,
this, I'll
go,
just say that in the rest of the Substack, including portions that we were not allowed to read because we're not subscribers. He Romero elaborates this possibility of what a world without law, a world of deepfakes without law would look like, and then apparently he enumerates what a world where deepfakes are moderated by law or banned by law might look like. So yeah, you were saying.
well, I think I was just going to try and start this ball rolling a little bit. You know, the question about making something like this illegal,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh.
On the surface, it sounds very good, right? Let's limit the slop. Let's remove the untruthiness to the internet and let's somehow see if we can sort of de-silo people and bring them back. But uncomfortably, I'll say that there's real problems with that because there's obviously then there's a link to a New York Times article in here that talks about the potentially chilling effects on free speech and possible due to limits on political campaigning and such that there's the potential for real abuse if we um, start tinkering with what people can say and can't say and how they can say it.
I would agree that, but I'm going to throw this in there. I took another thing from the New York Times piece because these cases are being made, and there are certain precedents in New York and especially in California where people who feel victimized by deepfakes are losing. And you're right. The claim is free speech. These cases are being lost. Um, and the principle of free speech is upheld. I have to say though that in some of these cases it seems just a cynical attempt to um, let AI be untrammeled, right? Just to
Oh,
let the AI machine go and go because there might be money and profits to be
to
made.
be clear,
Yeah.
I agree with you 100%. And I think that the argument that says, oh no, limiting this technology or
Is
adjacent
limiting speech,
technologies
right? It's
is
limiting speech.
limiting speech and we can't do that is is the upper tier of terrifying.
Yeah,
I think that that
right,
is a gold brick road to somewhere terrible.
right.
Um, the problem is parsing out the good with the bad,
Sure,
parsing out
sure.
a way forward. You know, do we need protections? The deep fake porn is the low hanging fruit here, right? Do we need
I agree.
protections
I
for
agree.
victims of stuff like
Right,
that? Absolutely, unquestionably.
right,
But you know, the problem is that we are in a position now where this idea of common ground is so incredibly difficult to find.
right,
You
right,
know, it seems to me that the answer here is like we have to get, you know, people in charge of making laws on opposite ideological ends of the spectrum to
right.
somehow both be simultaneously victimized in the same way.
Hmm.
And when that happens, we can now agree on some sort of common problem and solution. And so, you know, I think that the trick here is in finding something akin to common ground in an increasingly siloed world. That's where I look at this. Like I think that
Hmm.
the idea that we can make something illegal because we don't like what it says or what it looks like,
That's
this
okay.
this feels to me like the like how many discussions around, you know, the distinctions between art and pornography.
Hmm.
You know, to say I'll know it when I see it is very, very dangerous to
Very
me.
dangerous. Right, right. Very risky for a free democratic civil society. Well, Michael, I think you eloquently pointed out some of the issues with making this as a legal matter, making the AI deepfake crisis, making it a legal matter, or pursuing the legal path to resolve the issues. Maybe the final thing we could talk about is let's, that I'll just put out there, and I'd like to hear your opinions of. I kind of want to revisit that next to last sentence in section one. I'll read it. Oh, no, where you were. Go ahead, go
Oh, I'm
back to
sorry,
where you
sorry, sorry,
were.
sorry.
Yeah, just exactly where you were. But just like the
I
sentence
got you.
that yeah. I would read it. I was going to read it aloud and I would make a comment and I want to hear your comment. And maybe that's going to hopefully tie some of these discursive threads together. So as you mentioned, and as we just discussed, Romero ends this section by saying, by offering the possibility that law can be the solution. And he asks, we could make AI video illegal. And we just talked about that option. But I wanted to read the sentence that precedes it, where he imagines dealing with deepfakes in a non-legal, without having legal recourse,
Hmm.
um, or without searching for a solution in the courtrooms. And so he writes, well, what would that be? And he tries to give us an idea of what that would be like. So I'll just read a little bit of the passage you read. We will have to learn to live by inverting the dynamics of acquiring knowledge and building trust. We used to trust first and check later.
Right.
And now we must check first and trust later, if ever. So, my final question for you, and I'll ponder it too, is how viable is that world?
Well,
Can can skepticism be enough to help us all survive in our various states of alternative reality or our various cultural niches?
so I'm going to do my best to give a very short answer because I actually want to hear what you have to say about
Oh,
this.
goodness.
I feel like the answer again is pharmacological. Yes, I think it's fine to say check first, trust later. But as Romero says earlier, our ability to check is extremely limited. I can only check either A, things that are universally agreed upon or nearly universally agreed upon. Gravity's still a thing, check. Breathing underwater difficult without apparatus? Check, right? Like there's a very limited number of things that are universally agreed upon. So what does that leave us? That leaves us our immediate sphere. What
Yeah.
can we see? What can we personally validate? That is, I think, a key component to this sort of intellectual, ideological siloing that has
Mm.
created the divisions in the first
Mhm.
place. So, is it viable? Absolutely, it's viable. We do it all the time.
And we
But
do it all the
in
time.
doing that, again, we isolate ourselves from difference because it's very hard to validate difference.
So how is that a solution though? Where you were saying, or rather, you were invoking the pharmacon.
Well, I think it's a solution in the sense that, yes, we can operate that way,
Oh, but it's also poisonous.
but it's also poisonous because it continues to divide us.
Mhm. Well, I do have a brief. I don't want to
No,
interrupt you.
please.
I
I'm very interested in what you have to say.
I
Go ahead.
have a brief post that you're going to like because I didn't think we would be talking about pharmacons
I'm gonna
as
drop.
often as we did.
I'm gonna drop McLuhan's name in 30 seconds somehow.
you, you better because you're not. We don't have that much more time left, so get it in. I didn't think that I was going to mention the pharmacon again, but I think that's how I would like to end. So, two things about the pharmacon. Number one, the sentence I just read and that you just commented on. I think that is the pharmacological situation, or rather, that situation of oscillating between trust and skepticism. That could be construed as an individual mental operation.
Yep.
And in a sense, the reason why you're doing that mental operation, oscillating between, like, trust is, the reason you're oscillating between those two poles is because neither of the pole, if indulged, is going to save you. If you just trust, you're in trouble. If you just are a skeptic, you're in trouble. So you have to, if essentially you are being asked to oscillate between these two poles, it's kind of similar to a pharmacological situation.
There's one other aspect to this as well that we haven't talked about, and I don't want to
Mhm.
derail us, but it's also a hell of a lot of work to check
Sure,
first. There's fatigue. This
sure,
process
sure.
limits
Oh,
our
absolutely.
ability.
That's why we proceed on trust because if we do check first for everything, there's no
We don't go
there's
very
no
far.
possibility. Yeah,
You
we
you
don't
don't go past
generate.
the end of your
No,
street.
no, you don't. Right. I think that's one of the reasons why Romero feels this is a kind of crisis moment because the alternative is actually no social productivity, no social cohesion. But let me continue with the pharmacon and I'll sign off here. Because when you were talking about the legal problem,
Yeah.
now I'll go back to that New York Times article that Romero links to a Substack post that he did earlier in this particular Substack post rather. And if you go to that earlier Substack post, you'll get a link to the New York Times article that Michael and I are referring to. But anyway, very briefly, it's talking about the history of these cases that have been overturned, attempts to enforce victims' rights in
Right.
relation
Right.
to deepfakes. Now, I most of the case, or a lot of the cases that I recall in the article, um, a lot of the cases were, I think, rather cynically done by republic, basically funded by conservative forces trying to defend AI from um, just trying to aid and abet big business and big tech. That said, when you were talking, as you were discussing the case, it struck me that one of the problems actually with law, with introducing the law and
Yeah.
having law as a recourse, is that the law isn't pharmacological. It's not. As you were mentioning, it comes up with a rule, instantiates a rule. The rule will have to be overturned. It's, I guess, dialectical, but it's
Hmm.
not quite pharmacological. And
N-
in fact, to pursue the, well, I'll put it this way, to pursue the legal discourse or recourse, you have to assume, and I think this is what Romero is doing when he brings up the law as a solution. He's assuming that AI deepfakes aren't pharmacons, they're poison. And that strikes me as being perhaps deeply unphilosophical.
I think that that's very right. He does not see the benefit that would
Any
somehow have
possible
to
evidence.
be
Yeah, any
inherent,
possible.
right?
Right.
So, but I have a question for you, and I don't mean to drag this out, but this is an interesting observation. The pharmacon is a relationship to or with an idea, right? And so legally, like legality, legislation
Right.
is not pharmacological because I think what makes the relationship what makes a relationship pharmacological, right, is the evolution and our orientation towards something. We learn how to exist with these things.
Absolutely.
And
And so it's an adaptation to a
yes,
certain kind of trying circumstance.
whereas
Absolutely.
the law doesn't so much adapt as it changes.
As
Is
it
that
changes, it provides a verdict that instantiates justice, stops a form of behavior, things like this,
but it's
right?
absolute. And
And
that's the
it's
reason
absolute.
why
It's absolute.
that's a
And I'm
fascinating.
not thinking of it as farm. So as you were, and I was getting this from your description, you were talking about, okay, what is it? What might be the problem with the law? And as you were talking, I was
It's
thinking
inflexible. It's yeah,
it's
it's
inflexible.
but so you think that's Romero's potentially weak spot here as well, is that
Well, I mean, what are we trying to do in critical media studies now that we've been doing this 30 years? It's been a long time. But I think there's a consistent thread. And the consistent thread is this idea that of the wow, this is really the farm. Just let's just call this the pharmacological episode because
huh,
I think really that's kind of the foundation of this podcast.
yeah.
So that when I come across a point of view, and I really like Romero as a AI critic, as a social media critic, as a reader, digital tech culture and its ethical ramifications. So this is not a slam on him at all. I really admire his work and his writing. On the other hand, to actually work through and take seriously the legal option. As you were talking, I said that presumes that the media in question, the media form in question, is not as McLuhan would describe it, is
There you go.
not as Stiegler would describe it. It is an unequivocal disaster, catastrophe,
It
evil.
is the terrifying poison.
It is a terrifying poison. You can't talk about it as a pharmacon. If you talk about it legally, you basically you're saying
Now,
law has to save us from the pharmacon, right? The law must save us from the
and that
pharmacon.
can't be
And I
that
do think that's what he's saying.
and that can't be right though, because the idea again is that this is your direct relationship
Sure.
with. And
Well,
so to
that's
have a
Stiegler,
meet but
right?
well,
That's
right.
Stiegler.
So to have a mediating influence here, that's bravo.
Well, I don't know if it's Bravo, but I think
Well,
that's
no,
where
because
we ended.
I think so. What makes this tricky, and here you go. I'm gonna see if this can wrap us up. Right, is that again we talk about alternate truth. We talk about being silent, like from a critical media studies perspective. This fails because it is a and I don't know that I can conflate pharmacology with critical media studies necessarily, right? Like I don't think that's fair, but the 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 conclusion here about making it illegal is sort of
Not
a
pharmacological.
it's
Right.
I think I'll say it's an inelegant solution,
Right.
right? That
Right.
fails to account for certain potentially unsavory but potentially non-poisonous.
Yeah. And I think also what I've been trying to articulate, and I think you remind me of it. What I'm trying to say, I think basically this podcast kind of returns to a philosophical notion that we think of the pharmacon as a kind of philosophical approach to media.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's ethical and philosophical. And so therefore a univocal mandate about the essence of media, I think that's kind
We
of
can't
not
do that.
our thing. Can't
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we got to draw the line. Even though I really like talking, really like this post and love talking about it with you, Michael.
Well, I'm not going to cry, Barry. I'll be honest with you because I think Mr. Romero is going to write something else that's going to be interesting, and we'll come
Here
back.
we are.
And in that
Okay.
regard, we're flexible. This was this did not go
As we expected, but
where I thought it was going to go,
that's
and
how it should go. But
I
that's how it
kind of
should be.
love that. I kind of love that. Well,
How it should be.
all right. Well, Barry, good job. Good to see you again, and
Good to see you, sir.
thank you for an interesting discussion.
Thank you, sir. Until next time.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Critical Media Studies podcast. To find out more about the show, check out our webpage at criticalmediastudiespodcast.com.